All right, it's a Wednesday night, and that means one thing. It's time to talk SEC football here on SEC Breakdown, where we bring in the very best bloggers around the country to talk about SEC football. So even in April, with spring football for some of the clubs just concluded this past weekend, another handful get things concluded this next weekend. We bring in Mike Laval from SEC Breakdown right here, and also Last Word on Sports. And we've got Jamie Hancock, well, guest contributor here from Preps Nation. Jamie, thanks so much for joining us here.
I appreciate it. I believe that's the first time I've been called a little anything.
And I probably will never touch that word again in our conversations again. So the one time it may apply in certain aspects, and I'll leave it right there. Okay, Mike. The big news, obviously, coming out from last Friday is that this Division I Council has effective immediately, shut down all satellite camps. And so FBS programs will not be able to conduct clinics outside of school facilities, campus, regularly used practice facilities for any kind of competitive practices. So this has obviously raised all sorts of concerns and controversies and debates in terms of freedom versus what's good for the student athlete, what's good for competition, and what's fair across the board. So your thoughts, Mike, on the satellite camp ruling?
Mark, I think the satellite camp ruling was a little bit of an overreaction on both sides, which is something you see in the offseason when you have news of this sort. As far as the legislation itself, I think it's a little bit of an overreaction to Harbaugh's actions, which I think they kind of played into his narrative that he's building. The legislation, I believe, as I read the interpretation from the NCAA, also excludes in-person evaluation by coaches, which is something they have previously been able to do. I think it's a little bit overreaction. We do live in an information age where kids can get their videotape through Huddle and other software, other technological advances. Pretty much any kid can be seen on tape by any coach in the nation. It does hurt the in-person evaluation, which I do believe is very important. So I think the legislation is a little bit of an overreaction to Harbaugh. I think people are still figuring out how to handle such a personality on the national scene. At the same time, the reaction to the legislation, I think, is an overreaction as well. A lot of people are calling this that the SEC is protecting their turf, or that the NCAA is cowering to the SEC. I think it's blatantly just false. Look at what I would call the four biggest recruiting grounds. If you look at Florida, probably the biggest recruiting ground, you have two ACC teams, at least two, off the top of my head, two G5 teams, and then just one SEC team. So that's really ACC and SEC territory and some Group of 5 territory as well. Maybe the other biggest recruiting ground is Texas. You got four Big 12 teams right there: Texas, Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU, just off the top of my head. And then you got a sizable G5 contingent: Texas State, UTEP, North Texas, and UTSA, just off the top of my head, four G5 teams, and you have one SEC team. So that's really Big 12 territory and G5 territory as well, not so much SEC territory. The third probably biggest recruiting area is California. That's all Pac-12 territory, four in-state schools, plus the Pacific Northwest schools recruit down there heavily. Arizona State recruit probably Texas just as much as they recruit California, I think. I'd have to dive into the numbers. And then the fourth area is probably the greater Atlanta area, Georgia. So again, you see that ACC-SEC split with the G5 teams, Georgia Southern and Georgia State. So I think the counter narrative to the NCAA's overreaction is that it's the college football landscape cowering to the SEC, which I think when you dig into it and look at it, it makes sense that the Big 12, the Pac-12, the SEC, and the ACC would be against schools picking up their entire team over spring break and having essentially 5 spring practices 2,000 miles away from their campus. I think it makes sense that those 4 conferences would do that, and I also think it makes sense that a couple of the G5 conferences would vote against that. It's just something that's in those conferences' best interest. It's not those conferences cowering to the SEC. So I think we have overreaction on both sides, which is par for the course when you talk about news in the offseason.
Yeah, those are the big recruiting bases. I think we see the numbers come out right around National Signing Day each and every year when we see where the best players come from, and it's those territories that you just mentioned. So in addition to that, there's probably a second tier that's based in Ohio and to a lesser degree Pennsylvania. And for that reason, and also the reason of the national brand, Ohio State's really been the only school from up north that has consistently, over the Tressel and Urban Meyer eras, been able to go south, pluck some players, and recruit top 5 classes consistently. Michigan's fallen behind a little bit up until this surge by Harbaugh and his big name coming to campus. Notre Dame has its issues in trying to compete with the upper echelon SEC teams in particular. Jamie, your thoughts about the ruling and how you think things should stand in regards to these satellite camps?
I'm actually okay with the ruling to a degree. I think I do agree that it is a bit of an overreaction from everyone in the standpoint, and you hear a lot of people saying, well, this is going to ruin this for these kids. No, it's not. Most of these kids that go to these satellite camps are not going to be your featured athletes for a school like Michigan. It's just not the case. And so it's more about the Michigan brand being put into places that it typically isn't a feature item. And I do agree that you guys touched on the big-time recruiting bed areas. I don't necessarily know that that's where the biggest effect of these satellite camps comes from. One of Michigan's biggest play was in Prattville, Alabama over the last couple years, doing a satellite camp there. And the reason that was important for them is Alabama has always been seen as a state that kids don't typically leave too far from mama, as the coaches will tell you. So getting their brand into the state of Alabama with kids that don't typically travel is a bigger deal to me than it is getting your brand into Florida, where the kids are willing to travel more than they are from the state of Alabama or something of that nature. If you notice, Michigan has signed, I want to say, 3 kids out of Alabama in the last 2 years because of their efforts of getting their brand here, and that really helps them to that degree. And I think they really they riled the story up by getting that close into SEC country, is where the media got a hold to it. But I think that hitting the greater Atlanta area is something that all the coaches are going to do. Hitting the Florida area, they're going to do that. They're going to cover Texas. They're going to cover California. But if you can take a state like Alabama, which is not easy to travel, there's no good way to fly into Alabama. You can fly into Birmingham, but most of them find it more economical to fly into Atlanta. And they make a one-day trip through Alabama trying to fill as much as they can. University of New Hampshire calls me every year and tries to set up the way that they want to travel through Alabama in one day. And it's hard to hit Birmingham, Montgomery, and Mobile in one day. You cannot do it. And so it's easier to come to the state of Alabama at a satellite camp, post up in Prattville, which is right there in the center of the state, and draw some of the kids that you want to see. You're really only looking at 5 or 10, truly. There may be 100 there. There's 5 or 10 that has a legitimate shot to get on Michigan's board. So they can pull them all into one place at one time rather than trying to spend 3 days in the state of Alabama, which is what you would have to do if you wanted to hit Clay Chalkville, Hoover, Spanish Fort down in Mobile. Those schools are 4 or 5 hours apart. So that eats up one day, not to mention trying to go over to Opelika, Alabama, to Auburn and hit the schools there. You can't pull it off in one single day, so you have to pick and choose. Or you could do the satellite camp in Prattville and pull the 5 or 10 kids that you truly want to see and get them in one day.
Okay, very interesting topic. That's something that's very much hit the college football landscape just in recent months with the maneuvers of Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and it's really come to light and taken the forefront. We switch from that, the satellite camp ruling by the Division I Council, to a subject that's been on the minds of college football fans and media for quite some time, and that's the number of bowl games. So if you go back 25, 30 years, 6 and 5 teams would readily make bowl games, but we had an 11-game schedule. You at least had to have a winning record to make a bowl participation, and there would also be some 6 and 5 teams that would be left out of postseason play. We went to the 12-game schedule a few years later, and now we're at a point where all the 6 and 6 teams, even in the group of 5, make bowl play. And with the addition of a few more bowl games this past season, which I believe brought us to 39 bowl games, including the college football playoff games, we get to 39 bowl games, and it didn't take a mathematician to understand before one game was played in the 2015 season, because of roughly 125 to 129, we're in that range, number of FBS teams, and 78 bowl slots, that there would have to be losing teams participate in postseason play, unless, of course, the numbers were completely skewed and you had a zillion 10-2 teams and a number of 2-10 teams, and that middle landscape of college football was gutted. But that's not the case. The math worked out, and of course, we had to grab some 5-7 teams to participate in bowl play. Minnesota and Nebraska come to mind, and also I believe San Jose State, a 5-7 team, also had to play in postseason play. Okay. There's been a decision made that for the next few football seasons, we're going to freeze the number of bowl games because they've been added on 1 or 2 or 3 at a time most seasons in the last 10 or 12 years. So, Mike, we'll start with you in regards to the ruling on bowl participation, the freeze that's been enacted until 2019, and whether you think that's good for college football or maybe not so much.
Well, Mark, I think the bowl freeze. I can see both perspectives here. I think there's 128 teams. You're looking at 78 teams. You mentioned the math. The math gets hard to do. So you either have to freeze it and only let winning teams or 500 teams play, or you have to allow yourself to see bowls as they once were, and that's exhibition. A lot of people don't realize that all the national championships before, I believe, 1966 were awarded at the end of the regular season. The bowl games, the Rose Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, all those original bowls were only exhibition games, and the national champions had already been crowned. So if you're willing to go back and see bowls as what they started as, and that's exhibition games at the end of the season, rewards for the players, then I'm okay with that. But in today's hyper-competitive era, where financials are the most important, TV rights, and everybody compares everything, we've gone from the regionalism of college football to now it's a national, almost semi-professional sport. So we've lost that era of amateurism and exhibitionism. So I think because of the era in which college football is played, I think capping the bowls is good. They need to be quality contests. Once you get 5 and 7 teams playing, you kind of dilute the product. Although if you look at Nebraska, I believe they won their bowl game. So I can see both sides of the argument. I kind of like capping it. I think probably 35 to 40 is the right number. Certainly nothing over 40. I think we can actually cap it a little bit lower. But I do think there is a valid argument to see bowls as what they once were, and that's exhibition and reward for players at the end of the season.
All right. In fact, Minnesota, Nebraska, and San Jose State, all three 5-7 teams won their bowl games. So they went 3-0 after being told that they shouldn't belong. And based on the results of the season, I don't think that they should have been playing, but they did step up in bowl participation and won the games. Jamie, your thoughts about the cap on bowls, and do we have too many of these games?
I agree. It's probably gotten out of hand. You have watered down the product, although parity in the game and amongst the median teams is very good right now, and that's what's going to cause the numbers to sometimes end up like they did this year with 3 teams that did not qualify with the actual number of wins but have to get in. The only 2 things that hurts me when making the decision to cap it is anytime we've got football games to watch, it's usually a positive in my opinion. The biggest thing is, having been an athlete and played, it is important for these young men, these young athletes, to get the opportunity to feel rewarded for all the things that they've gone through. I know they're on a scholarship, the majority of them, and that's their reward. However, when you wake up and head into the weight room at 5:30 every morning to go in there and lock the door behind you with some crazed lunatic in the weight room, which is usually the strength and condition coach's job, is to be an absolute nut, is to get the most out of those guys. You know, it's tough to tell those kids, well, you know, you guys are done, and you're going to have to go in there and face that cat with best we can down. It needs to be a hallowed product that we all appreciate, and these young men do deserve some reward, but maybe not at the expense of the product.
Hey, Mike, I'm glad you gave some historical perspective and some knowledge there. I'm guessing that most of the audience isn't aware of the way the bowl games were looked at and officially reviewed, that the national championships were awarded, because now when we're counting national championships, this comes up, and we've been doing that in recent years, counting the national championships because there are discrepancies out there, and then we see where I'll bring one up in particular. Ohio State, credited with a national championship, lost the Rose Bowl to Stanford. There you go. And that happened several times with a number of schools. Uh, when I think it's impossible to get two schools together like we see across the board, these power programs, to get them together at this with the amount of attention and money and eyeballs to the TV screens, and say this is an exhibition game and it really doesn't matter. It's just, as you called it, and I think in one phrase it hits home, ultra competitive, hyper competitive atmosphere that we have. It's impossible on these big stages with all the money on the line and all the eyeballs in the stadium and on the TV screen to say, Michigan and Florida are going to play an exhibition game at the Capital One Bowl. That's just not going to happen. So I believe that there needs to be a bar, there needs to be a standard, and I would like to see that standard. It's not going to go back to this, and I love bowl games, and it's gotten to a point where there's too many for me, but I also hear the argument, if there's too many, don't watch them. And I watch them all. I try to watch them all, at least. I would watch any bowl game or any teams that are out there playing football. So Jamie, you said it. When there's football being played, that's usually a good thing. But I do think that there should be a standard, and for me that standard would be 7 and 5. Now then you're really talking about paring back the bowl games. So I'm okay with 6 and 6. Now we've gotten where the math makes it impossible not to take losing teams. So I think this is a good move, and it's about time that we get to a point where, yeah, when you're talking about 80 teams out of roughly 125 to 130 participating, that's a bit much. You're like the NHL was back when 16 out of 21 made the postseason. Ridiculous. Why are you even playing a regular season at that point? You're eliminating 5 teams out of 21. So probably a good thing. Still plenty of bowl games, still plenty of football to watch around the holidays, and still a good shot for your team to make it at 6 and 6. All right, guys, we're going to talk about a team that did barely make postseason play because of 4 consecutive wins outside of the conference, combined with a 2 and 6 slate in the SEC. And Jamie, we're going to tee you up for your Auburn Tigers, a team that made it pay off getting that bid to postseason play and beating a pretty good Memphis team and playing maybe its best game of the season against Memphis. Also a good outing against Texas A&M that last month. So maybe a little bit better play out of your Auburn Tigers late in the season, but now kind of a transitional time moving into this season. And we'll start at quarterback, and you can take us anywhere you want looking at the Auburn Tigers right now with the spring game just concluded.
Starting with quarterback, like you said, is the most important position to the Auburn football program right now. You've got 3 guys. I don't think that any of them have been able to establish themselves as the guy that's going to make the difference for Auburn just yet. I believe that John Franklin III has the most opportunity to do that for one reason and one reason only, and that's because of his skill with his legs. It's not going to be because he's the most polished passer. It's not going to be because he's had the most time in the offense. It's going to be he can cause a defense the most opportunity to be strained and stressed over anything else that the other guys can do. John Franklin can do things similar to what has made Gus Malzahn successful over the years, which is stretch the defense east and west more than they were able to do with a traditional style quarterback behind center. And Franklin, with all of his shortcomings, which includes a lack of good weight, if you consider that important in the SEC, and I do, also with a lack of pure passers accuracy, which he's never going to have. He can do things that's going to help make Auburn successful on the perimeter as well as down the field, more so than Sean White and definitely more so than Jeremy Johnson. Sean White is the most comfortable. He appears to be the most competent at this point. However, I do think the best chance for them to be successful will be with John Franklin III.
Hey, Jamie, we kick around Auburn football, SEC football from time to time. This is the first time you and Mike have had a chance to to talk SEC football, talk some Auburn Tigers. So I'm going to tee it up and let Mike ask you some questions. Before I'm going to come back at the end, I got one specific question for you about the state of the program, considering getting to a BCS championship game a few years ago, and now what we've seen, the results on the field the last couple of years. But I'll let Mike go right now.
And thanks, Mark. Jamie, I really got three questions for you. I'll start off. I like to look at the coaching situation. I look at Auburn's coaching situation. You guys have 5 of your 9 position coaches coming in new. Is Auburn going to be able to implement the systems and get on the same page before they start this season with Clemson with all these new coaches? And I just noticed that 5 of the 9 assistant coaches are new, because as Malzahn enters his 4th year, that just seems odd to me that we're doing a coaching overhaul, which I think 5 of 9 qualifies as an overhaul, going into the 4th year of a program. Are the coaches going to be able to get on the same page in time?
I would like to say so, and I agree that that is a great question that nobody tends to bring up, and it may be one of the most important questions right there with the quarterback quandary that they have. The thing that may help them out is Cody Burns is, quote-unquote, one of Gus Malzahn's guys. He understands what Malzahn wants to do. I think Malzahn needed badly to surround himself with people that buy into him and his system versus some guys who are just really good coaches that may or may not be fully on board with how he wants to do things. Whether you believe in what Malzahn does or not, he's the guy running the helm. He has proven he can do a good job. He has to have everyone buying in and on the same page. Cody Burns and Herb Hand are 2 guys that are familiar with him, that have worked with him extensively in the past, and I think they will absolutely buy into what he is selling, and that will help them offensively a great deal. When you go over to the defensive side of the ball and you talk about Travis Williams, he's been there. I think Malzahn and the staff are comfortable with him, and I think he's comfortable with them. That leaves you with McGriff and Kevin Steele. McGriff has been around several SEC programs. He's been in the NFL, so he obviously knows what he's doing as a football coach. So hopefully that'll work out. Kevin Steele, it's up to him to establish himself at a program for multiple years, because he has bounced around quite a bit over the last 5 to 6 years. That is somewhat of a concern. But the biggest thing, I believe, is if the staff can buy in, the kids will buy in. These kids are a lot smarter than people give them credit for, and I'm not talking about in pre-cal. I'm talking about in football and in life. If there's a problem with the coaches, they sense it. It's like a shark smelling blood. If the kids see that the coaches are not on the same page, there's no chance the team will ever be on the same page.
Jamie, you mentioned Herb Hand, and I think one of the position battles that people are missing because of the quarterback battle is on the offensive line. I've read where Herb Hand has moved Xavier Dampier to center, and if you read some of Matt Malzahn's book, if you read his book about offense, you know how important center is to that offense and how important that offensive line is, getting the count right, determining which side of the field they're going to run the play to. What do you think? Give us your thoughts on the offensive line's development over the spring and how they're going to look come Clemson week.
I think that Dampier getting the extra year last year, picking up the medical red shirt, is a big thing. He's an older kid. He's been through a lot. He's a guy that went through the JUCO route, which anybody will tell you is not an easy route. So he's proven himself for that. He lost a job last year, never pouted, ends up getting a medical red shirt and coming back for this year. I think that's a big deal because he's an older, more mature guy. He's got a lot of experience at center, and hopefully his determination is going to be a big thing, because at center, it's as much about being a leader and being determined as it is about talent. And so you have to be a leader there. Austin Golston, I don't think was ever truly comfortable at the center position, and he's probably quite possibly the most athletic offensive lineman in their first 5. It's a natural move for him to left tackle. He's got experience in the SEC at tackle from Ole Miss, so it's not something that's completely new to him. Left tackle, yes, but he hasn't played that since being at Prattville, Alabama. However, he's the best athlete on the offensive line, and I think that's going to fit him quite well at left tackle. Dampier hopefully is a vocal gentleman, never met him, but you hear positive things about how he carries himself and how he took things last year when it didn't quite go his way. So I do think that may be something. They just have to get more continuity. An offensive line is about pure continuity, and if they have no continuity, you have no offense. It's always going to be about the offensive lineman. They won't get the headlines, but if you see a good football team, a good offense, you can bet your tail they've got a good offensive line.
Hey, what position did you play in college?
Offensive line.
Okay, I was just wondering. Hey,
I started off on the defensive line, got moved to the offensive line 7th week of the season due to some injury things, and that's where I stayed.
last question for you. It's quick. How short is the leash on Gus Malzahn? And two-part question: is Jay Jacobs tied to Gus Malzahn?
I would hope that the leash is not as tight as most people think. One thing, because I believe Malzahn is a good person. After all, this is about collegiate sports. It's a big business. It's always going to be about wins and losses, but it's really about the money. And so as long as he's doing the things that he's supposed to do, they need to show progress. If they show progress, they need to allow him to do what he's doing. If you see another season of pure turmoil, I do believe that that's going to signal trouble. And for Jay Jacobs, I think is another good individual. I do believe he's tied to Gus Malzahn for one reason and one reason only, because of all the other coaches that they've moved through, even not in football, in baseball, in basketball. Jay Jacobs has made some moves that people saw as good moves. They did not work out. And so there's so much money tied up in coaches that are no longer in Auburn, Alabama. I do think that he's tied to Gus Malzahn for the reasons of Tony Barbie, for the reasons of Sonny Galloway. I believe that that's why he's tied to Gus Malzahn, is because now this is where you prove that you deserve to be the athletic director at Auburn University, is with your successful hiring of a football coach that can stay. So, yes, fair or unfair, I do believe because of the other coaching moves that has not worked out, I believe he's tied to Gus Malzahn.
Thanks, Jamie. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, Jamie Hancock from Preps Nation joining us here on SEC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock there in Alabama Central Time Zone. So, Jamie, one more question for you from me. This Auburn, if you just look at the record and the results, has to be the biggest roller coaster ride. I can't imagine a bigger one in college football history. National champions in 2010, then the last couple Malzahn years, or the last one, they won a bowl game, were like 8-5. Then they bottom out 0-8 in the SEC. The very next season, one of the miraculous turnarounds in the history of college football to get to the national championship game, and now we see the program coming back to a place where they were supposed to be competing for a college football playoff spot the last 2 years and fell well short of that, and it looks to be going in the wrong direction. Your observation of what's going on there, where the program stands, is it on stable ground or maybe not so much?
That's a very difficult question to ask. It's almost like being on the San Andreas Fault in a sense, because you said it. The last few times that Auburn has been expected to do extremely well, I think the statistics are if they start off in the top 5 in the preseason polls, they have finished with below 8 wins each time, the last 3 to 4 times that that's taken place. However, the times that they're not typically expected to do much, such as Nick Marshall's junior year, such as Cam Newton's first year, in times where it appeared to be turmoil filled, they ended up doing well as the underdogs. And that's something that people have to realize about the state of Alabama. People that are Auburn people will absolutely hate this statement. Auburn will forever be the underdog in football in the state of Alabama. Paul Bear Bryant made sure that that will always be the case because of the success that they had. Auburn will always be the redheaded stepchild. It will never change. They can be good. They are better as an underdog. They are better as the hunter than they are as the hunted. And it's been that way for years and years and years. And I think that that is a better spot for them to be in. You can play without the pressure of being the hunted. It's easier to sneak up on people the first 5 weeks, and then everybody knows who you are. But if you can sneak through the first 5, then you've beaten half the battle. So it's important for Auburn to play loose. If there are no expectations, you can go out there and play loose, and that's what they need to do.
Yeah, it's a unique situation where I think it can be argued and justified that this is one of the top 15 programs in college football, but it's in the same state boundaries as most likely the gold standard for college football, and that's the plight of the Auburn Tigers and Gus Malzahn at this point. So this is SEC Breakdown. It's Wednesday night. We talk football 12 months a year, 52 weeks a year with Mike LaValle this week from Last Word on Sports, and also Jamie Hancock from Preps Nation. So, guys, it's always been a good time and a pleasure this week to talk football with you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mark.
I appreciate it. One topic for conversation for you guys. I hate to do it right here at the end. The next big bullseye in college football, they've taken out the satellite camps. IMG Academy, I believe, is the next big bullseye.
Yeah, that would be one to throw out there. I would not be surprised in regards to what's going on there, and this is a stepping stone to that. I could see that.
Absolutely. Guys,
All
I
right,
appreciate
guys.
it. I really do. Getting to join you guys and talk the game is fun, and I agree about Mike. What he contributed to the history part of the game, I thought was fantastic. I appreciate the conversation.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks, guys. See you again next week.